Just for the record, especially for writers out there, I definitely believe in the three-act structure. But to me, it is a very loose three-act structure. All it means is beginning, middle, and end.
All right, well, let's talk about some of your rules. You've been through this, you've written for TV, you've written for comic books, you've written for movies, you've done it all, sir. Uh,
Ah,
what is it that makes you realize a story is ready to be written?
oh, I wish I had an easy answer for that. I don't. What I actually find is I've got in my computer, I've got files and files of scenes. I think very visually. So I'll get an idea for something I think is a good scene. And usually it's not dialogue driven. Usually it's, wouldn't it be cool if? It's something I want to see. And I'll describe that. Or I'll have an idea for a character moment and I'll describe that. And that file is very, very full. Sometimes I'll have an idea that will relate to one of these little snippets. And I go back and I start kind of throwing around an outline around it. And usually some of them make it to the point where I've got what I would say a full three acts. I believe, just for the record, for especially for writers out there, I definitely believe in the three-act structure. But to me, it is a very loose three-act structure. All it means is beginning, middle, and end.
Mhm.
Like if you want to say, no, there's actually 12 acts, and there's 12 acts, and there's three in the beginning, and seven in the middle, and then two at the end. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Beginning, middle, and end. Because if you've got a beginning and an end, you use four.
I use four acts. I just think the midpoint just is not been given its due. I think it
I'm
should count as an act break. So that's my
solidarity. I'm in total solidarity. I always know my midpoint
Mhm.
because I don't even know if it's an act break. It just gives me a signpost to write towards.
Mhm.
Because otherwise I'm gonna wander off into the wilderness. Second acts are easily the hardest acts, or what people think of the second acts.
Yep.
So second and third if you're using a four-act structure.
Well, it
Um,
makes it a little easier to write because I'm not writing 50-page act. I'm writing 20, 25 pages and trying to get to these things. But I normally just look at the first thing I figure out is the midpoint and the beginning and the end. And then I divide the midpoint, the two acts into half. You know what I mean? Then I have a first act break and a second act break, and I just kind of systematically divvy it up that way. But the first thing I personally need to know is what the midpoint is.
that's actually a pretty good way of doing it.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. I'm
But
glad.
but yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Everyone's like when we talk about the emotional process, I'll sort of figure out the plot and I'll get to the plot where it's like, oh, I've got an outline that kind of looks like I've got my beginning, middle, and end. I've plotted out enough beats in the second, third acts to know what's going on, and I'll start writing. And I find first acts come very quickly to me. I'm really good at starting the story as late as possible, almost to a flaw. People are going like, "Can we learn more about this?" And I'm like, "Really? Do you really care about that? Is that important?" What I've found happens a lot to me is I'll go to script and I will get close to the halfway point, but somewhere between the beginning of the second act and the midway point, I start getting tremendous resistance. And what will be missing is exactly what you talked about before. What we talked about is the emotional engagement.
Hmm.
The first acts are like, because it's all like juicy plot.
Yeah.
And now we get into the second act, and now things have to matter. And a lot of times I will have made a decision about what a story is about without understanding what the story is about.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like,
That sounds
oh, I
familiar.
thought this was a story about unrequited love and honor. But it's that's wrong. I decided that when I was working from an outline and I didn't know these people. And now I've spent an act writing these people. And now these people have a life and a voice, and they're telling me I am wrong. And that's not what this is about. And so, you just sort of pound your head on the keyboard until the blood forms words and but it is, but like what I find is I'll start writing weird scenes.
Hmm.
And what I mean by weird is like I will find myself making choices I did not anticipate. So, for example, in this thing that I have other that I was talking about, the zombie film, which is actually about family. I have a character who's you know, who I've established from the start is a bad person. They are a drug addict. They have just come from a shootout with police officers in which they murdered a police officer. They are running around the hospital. Everyone else is trying to stay away from the dead things. The dead things feed on fear. This person doesn't have fear. This person is high.
Mm.
Since they're not being attacked, they're ignoring the mayhem that's going on, and they're just moving from Pixis to Pixis, breaking them open and stealing all the dope. And that was as far as I had with the character. And completely, this wasn't in the outline. This wasn't anything. He was just one of the mix of variables in the story.
Hmm.
I got to the point where I had him on the maternity ward, and I had him pass by the window. And this is just me writing it. And so when I'm writing it, I'm not going, aha, I'm thinking, oh, this would be cool.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking horror movie. And we've got this character who he's established is a really scary person.
Yeah.
And there's a baby that's been left behind and is crying in the window. And he stops in front of the window and stares. And then leaves the shot. And the shot lingers. And now he's inside the room with the baby, looking down at the baby and staring. And then he picks up the baby, he swaddles the baby, and for the rest of the movie, he doesn't put the baby down. And I had not planned on that.
Mm.
And I was looking at it and I realized he's one of the heroes. I didn't know that when I was writing him.
That's awesome.
And then I went back and I just sort of tweaked
Hmm.
like the other character's introduction. So it's like, no, 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 this is a film about a family.
Yeah. No, it's a great moment too. It's a great
Well,
twist.
and then a friend of mine pointed out, it's like, you really like hard boiled, don't you? And I'm like, I love hard boiled. And it's like, yeah, because you're ripping off hard boiled. And I'm like, John Woo is so used to being ripped off. I don't think he minds.
Yeah, if you're gonna rip somebody off, Woo's a great one to go to. I love The
Oh,
Killer also. Yeah, I love I can't stream The Killer anywhere. I want to show it to my kids and it's not
oh.
available. I got to see if I can find a copy of it on DVD or something like that. Yeah.
You need to find a magician's like a magician's supply, and it's like, kids, I couldn't find a copy of The Killer, but here, and just like open up a trench coat and have a bunch of birds fly out,
Yeah, that's like
just like
Dubs.
the birds. Yeah, just the doves everywhere.